All right, we'll call to order the City Council Planning and Zoning Commission Joint Workshop Agenda for Monday, September 22nd, 2025 at 4 o'clock p.m. Roll call certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, certify council has a quorum as members Koza, Byram, Cade, and Fernandez are present. I do know both member Patel and Chavaria will be here a little late for this meeting. Member Carbone will not make this meeting. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a quorum. Commissioner Haskins is on his way. As far as Jennifer Hendricks, I think she's going to be absent, and Henry is out of the country, Fuentes. So.
Got it. With that, Madam Secretary, were there any citizens' comments turned in? With none, purpose of the workshop, discussion regarding the Unified Development Code UDC update. So with that, we'll turn it over to Vance.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Council, Mayor, Commissioners, and Chair. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for another UDC workshop. As a reminder, Planning and Zoning and City Council are the steering committee for this project. So today we've got a lot of content to cover, but the purpose of the workshop is to do kind of a report out on our listening sessions we've had so far and what we've collected when it comes to the regulatory document that is the UDC. So with that, I'll hand it over to Claire, and they'll run through our presentation.
All right, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Claire Hempel. I'm a principal with Design Workshop. Glad to be here with you. While we get the presentation up, I'll go ahead and start walking you through some of our initial slides. Just laying out the purpose of today's meeting. So in our last workshop, we worked together to identify issues and opportunities for key topics in the code. Since then, our team has consolidated, analyzed, and documented that information in a code assessment memo. So if you go to slide 4, okay. We have now completed 2 phases of the scope, and we're currently on task 1 of phase 3. As part of this, we have begun outlining higher level code updates based on the recommendations for each section and chapter of the code. These have been summarized in the code outline memo. Looking ahead to the next part of phase 3, our team is working towards the 50% draft. This draft will encompass the the recommended updates, including simple structural changes, updated graphics for certain sections, and refinements to review processes to ensure alignment with state law. It will also introduce new concepts in draft form, such as potential incentives to encourage high-quality developments in Pearland. Next slide. So we're here at Workshop 3, where we'll present an overview of the draft UDC outline, highlighting recommendation criteria drawn from the community engagement insights in alignment with the comprehensive plan. Earlier this morning, we met with the Technical Advisory Committee, which includes staff from Community Development, Legal, and EDC. From here, our team will begin drafting the 50% update of the UDC, which we will return to present on December 15th, along with the next public open house and the stakeholder meeting. On the lower left, you can see the engagement we have completed so far: 4 council meetings, 6 council and P&Z joint meetings, 6 one-on-one council member meetings, 3 stakeholder meetings, 2 focus groups, and 1 public open house. We also launched a project website just today, which will allow the public to stay up to date on the UDC's progress. Next slide. This slide highlights the key topics shown in gray boxes, which we discussed during Workshop 2 in April, June, and August. Today, we are here to report back on the framework for how we are approaching the code update and look for any comments or questions from you on key question slides that you'll see in blue. This is all based on what we've heard so far in the code assessment. We've drafted a few initial recommendations. So the way that we have broken this down, we work to identify shared goals and issues, which you can see at the top, associated with the key topics impacting Pearland's UDC. In today's meeting, we'll discuss preliminary recommendations for updating the UDC based on those goals and issues. The recommendations have been categorized within 3 typologies. 1, simple and structural; 2, process and enforcement; and 3, new policy concepts. So simple and structural simply means we're implementing or looking to implement targeted updates to improve clarity, streamline processes, and enhance usability. We're also clarifying and standardizing key terminology and incorporating graphics and visuals that will help reinforce key concepts, charts, and flowcharts to improve cross-reference and streamline access to key information. Let's stay here. So under process and enforcement, we'll consolidate administrative procedures into a single section, update administrative language in the UDC to accelerate review timelines based on the state law, and streamline approval processes to reduce redundancy and provide more predictable timelines. And under new policy concepts, we will introduce new strategies to encourage high-quality development and provide developers with flexible options while maintaining city quality standards. And also position the UDC as a proactive tool to advance the objectives of the Pearland 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Next slide. So the topics that we presented in Workshop 2, on some we heard strong consensus around where stakeholders are aligned and opposed to certain code recommendations. On some, we heard mixed opinions. In today's meeting, we will share recommendations that should be included in the code update, recommendations for what the code update should restrict or regulate, and discussion questions to clarify direction before drafting recommendations. On the following topics, there was enough consensus around where stakeholders are aligned and opposed to draft recommendations for code updates. We do not have specific questions about these topics, but we always welcome them. But we will pause after each slide for any questions or comments. More information is on the handout, and you can also provide feedback by returning your handout with any notes to Vance and his team. So, on each slide, the top left notes the recommendation type, color-coded to indicate the framework it falls under. That's going to be at the top right. So you see simple and structural is in blue, and then you'll see the bullet that corresponds to it to the left, and same with process and enforcement in yellow. So under the nonconformity recommendations here, we have create a dedicated corridor overlay district specifically for TxDOT roadways with tailored design and development standards like landscape buffers, revised parking signage, and access management strategies that reflect the unique impacts of roadway expansion. This will serve as a precedent for future overlays that undergo similar infrastructure upgrades with eminent domain. We'll also provide flexibility by providing thresholds for compliance with a revised code based on the level of impact, particularly as it relates to landscaping or parking. Next is update the trigger table with well-articulated site design standards for landscape, screening, lighting, signage, and revised setbacks for properties that have been impacted by eminent domain. This will ensure that affected sites can be redeveloped efficiently while still achieving a cohesive and visually appealing corridor appearance. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Here we have to update the approved plant material list to include a classification system with approved species for different conditions, including aggregate ground covers like river rock or gravel mulch. And sorry, this is under the landscaping topic. We are recommending to integrate best practices for stormwater management and planting in hurricane-prone areas to minimize runoff. This will require coordinated updates between the EDCM and the UDC. We also are recommending to ensure all landscape standards through the UDC reference the landscape section as a starting point to understanding requirements such as site development, parking, residential and non-residential design, and PD regulations. Provide spacing requirements from overhead and underground utilities as a range based on the species of the tree, and adopt alternative compliance options for constrained spaces where root management systems could mitigate potential utility conflicts underground, and align maintenance standards in the UDC with ANSI A300, it's an industry standard for nursery stock, as related for tree care. Next slide is about food truck recommendations. So here, we're recommending to clearly define food trucks or mobile food units, MFUs, in the UDC, so all relevant to eliminate ambiguity and ensure consistency across enforcement, permitting, and operational standards. Establish corresponding amenity, location, and site plan requirements for each condition to ensure safety, accessibility, and compatibility with adjacent land uses. as well as operational requirements such as hours of operation, noise limits, and waste management. Finally, on this one, define a permitting process for food truck operations in zone districts where they are not allowed by right. Use flowcharts or tables to simplify the permitting process for applicants and staff in a graphic way. All right. Confirm and clarify. We heard mixed opinions along with aligned or opposed reviews. And we have consensus on some recommendations, but for others, more discussion is required through the prompt questions that you'll see at the end of each topic recommendation. So for parking recommendation, we heard aligned feedback to include additional graphics to better integrate the land use and zoning matrix with parking ratios, simplified code navigation, and reduce the need for users to reference multiple sections when determining parking requirements. We plan to update the standards for large surface parking lots as needed to balance beautification, buffering between adjacent properties, and stormwater management. As mentioned earlier, this will require coordinated updates between the EDCM and the UDC. We are recommending an encouragement of the use of shared parking between neighboring businesses with complementary hours, such as a restaurant that may peak in the evening while a retail business peaks during the day. And on mixed feedback that we heard was to explore the removal of parking minimums in Old Town to fulfill the vision set forth in Pearland 2040, and the Old Town Revitalization Plan draft by preserving its walkable character and to maximize remaining developable land. Parking reductions or exemptions could be offered along key streets such as South Grand Boulevard and future infill sites to encourage the growth of small businesses. Reduce parking minimums for areas suitable for mixed use or compact development. For instance, the city of McAllen, Texas, recently updated its UDC to reduce parking requirements by as much as 50% for various non-residential uses, encouraging more efficient land use in walkable environments. Finally, recommend implementing parking maximums in other zoning districts to limit excessively oversized surface parking lots. As an example, the city of Frisco in Texas, the original Town Commercial District, OTCD, allows up to a 50% parking reduction for existing retail businesses. So we'll pause here and for questions. Go to the next slide.
So questions on everything up until now or just on parking?
Up until now.
We'll go to the, Mr. Chairman, we'll go with you guys first.
Trey?
I would be in support of reducing minimums or getting rid of minimums in the Old Town area. I think if we're going to develop what we have there and continue to use with, and especially from a market-based strategy, then we've got to find a way to allow some flexibility. I think nobody's going to really get into building and investing if they can't make it work with parking. I would be cautious about reductions, exemptions along certain corridors just because we're getting to residential areas. I think we need to make sure that whatever we do doesn't negatively impact adjacent residential uses. Again, I think it would behoove development such as what we're looking at Old Town to push parking to the rear and to the sides, but I think we just need to be cognizant of how that develops and how it's going to come out. I think ultimately the city's going to have to play a role in helping to acquire and develop some sort of parking flexibility in that area. Thank you.
The only thing I have on parking is, you think there would be any way that we could build like a parking garage type thing? I don't know if the city would be up to that or you know, some type of a revenue stream get a revenue stream off of it, but you know, it reduces the footprint because that area over there, it's going to be pretty tight. And I know the few events that they've had down there, parking has been one of the main concerns, and we don't even have it inhabited yet. So you know, to a big concern. But other than that, I'm good with everything else.
Anybody else? That
No, sir. It's back to you, Mayor. I'm
Good deal,
sorry.
good deal. Let's open up to council, weigh in up until now. Anybody have anything? Mayor Pro Tem? Goza?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 34, you address nonconformities on I guess like 518, depending on what we end up doing there. And I guess having the word nonconformity put up, I had some constituents reach out to me and said, what about all the nonconformities prior to the UDC going into place? And I haven't seen anything yet, but they want to make sure that it's not something that becomes punitive on them if they come to make minor adjustments. And I said, you know, I'll ask the question as far as non-conforming properties, will we still be looking at the, I guess, layouts of and requirements that we have now? What are we looking at non-conforming properties, because there's plenty of properties that have been here prior to, I think our UDC came in the late 90s, early 2000.
05.
Okay, I was going to say early 2000, somewhere right in there. So that was a question that I was asked.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think the bottom bullet there is really the answer to that specific question for things outside of corridors or the thing or nonconformities created by takings or road widenings, and that's the triggers table. And so updating the trigger table, which y'all would review, and these two bodies would review before it got approved, is where staff goes to look for, if you do this, you have to come into this level of compliance, or if you just do this, that's not needed. But I think that would be the answer.
Okay, like I said, the word nonconformities, hit a button, and so that's what I said I'll ask. And so if it's at a future date, that's fine. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple of questions, and that may be the same answer, but it's not necessarily here, but in the packet we were handed, page 4 of that packet says nonconformities, has a bullet point on here that says opposed, and says properties impacted by eminent domain shall not be subject to forced compliance requirements. Am I reading this correctly, that we are opposed to that language?
No, Mayor Pro Tem, the way to read that is the feedback that we received. Some were opposed, and that was their sentiment around the opposition on that.
They were opposed to that language.
They're opposed to.
Please, yeah, get real clear here on what this language is, because
Correct.
this is, and I'll weigh in real quick, because if somebody has property taken from them, whether they, wrote the check out or had to go to, full eminent domain. Here's the deal. That property, if it's got debt tied to it, and that building burns, get hit by lightning tomorrow, and it's a nonconformity, the bank goes, you mean my collateral is now subject to what? We call the note. And you've just financially ruined somebody. So I'm going to push real hard, that we don't put anybody in that kind of situation. I understand this went out to public, this went out to various people, but I'm telling you, as wide a swath as 518 is taking, and will be equally coming this other direction at some point in time, we don't need to put business owners, property owners, investors at peril, or because of a taking. Whether it was they agreed to the price or not, we don't need to put them at peril. And so I understand people want properties brought into conformity, but the non-conformance was through no fault of their own. And that's what I've heard from the city attorney's office for the last couple of years. If it's through no fault of their own, we need to be there to adhere to the nonconformity if and when something goes on, because they need to be able to rebuild their property as best they can, even if it's non-conforming. Because again, I don't want to be in a situation where a bank calls a note because the collateral is no longer the same. I mean, imagine if a building had to be cut down by 3, 4, 5,000 square feet. That collateral is in peril. So
I wasn't thinking about it from a collateral perspective, but I was thinking about it from the perspective of, you know, there's an adjoining property that is currently in compliance, and then through eminent domain, the city acquires the property adjacent to them. Now they're no longer in compliance. Are we gonna put it in our UDC that we can now go to them and say, you've got to make these changes and get into compliance, again, through no fault of their own? So that's what I want to make sure we don't do, is that we get into, there are situations where we have to take eminent domain to widen the street or put in whatever. And so we're essentially causing the nonconformity and then turn around and tell them, now fix it. I don't think that's right. So I just want to make sure that that's not the direction we're heading.
And even along that line, I know of one before we got into this where between McLean and the railroad tracks on 518, where a sign was taken out by a car. And to turn around and try and get the sign rebuilt was a monumental task. So it, you know, those type things we got to be, because when we get in non-conforming areas, and you're dealing with smaller parcels that are tightly confined, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and depending on what we do with parking, I mean, somebody's parking may be okay after the fact, but right now, we're gonna be taking parking, you're gonna be taking landscaping, you're gonna be taking even front setbacks. Setbacks are gonna change, rear setbacks, front setbacks, all of that's gonna change. In a lot of these properties, there is zero room to expand. They can't go and get property behind them because and we shouldn't be doing that. So I want to make sure that we're very clear on and I get we're going to look to define a new corridor overlay district that reflects the unique impacts of roadway expansions. And I'm thankful we're doing that, and we still have some time to do that. But they've had to deal with enough already with having their property impacted, and so now, you know, I want to make sure, you know, we don't have more, and we're causing it, like Mayor Pro Tem said. Not all of a sudden, you know, you just got to bring it all up to speed. You know, there's a fairness in this that's that we want to make sure that we're keeping it fair. I understand. And even if somebody has some minor updates to their building, and all of a sudden, oh, we want the whole UDC to be brought up to date, you know, and is that the right thing to do? So
That was the main thing. I just wanted to make it clear that, at least from my perspective, that was not a direction that I wanted to see the UDC go. And I wasn't real clear what this particular thing was saying in the workbook. Sounds like that's not what it's saying, which is good. I just wanted to be abundantly clear about that we don't want to put it in our UDC, that we're creating that, from my one person's opinion.
Understood. Thank you for the comment.
On the landscaping, and this may just be my own personal ignorance, so forgive me for asking stupid questions if they're stupid questions. But in the workbook, it says promote green infrastructure and require detention facilities to serve dual public uses. What is green infrastructure?
So green stormwater infrastructure is a fancy term for things like rain gardens, bioswales, treating the water where we can treat that runoff, perhaps taking pollutants out. So that's green stormwater infrastructure. When we say dual purpose, so you think about a big grassy, depressed area, may or may not have a fence around it. In some communities, that can also be used when not in a rain event for recreational uses like flag football, soccer, that kind of thing.
So we would be asking private property owners to allow their detention to be used for public use? Is that the way I'm reading this, or that would only be on city-owned property?
That would be, we're exploring what that means for private developers as either parkland dedication, or maybe it's a private park that they build. As allowed, we would need to work through this with the engineers, of course.
Okay.
let me piggyback and ask a question. on that since we're talking about it. Does this include like having regulations and criteria around low impact development or stormwater?
Green, yes, low impact development, green stormwater infrastructure kind of fall into the same bucket.
Same kind of bucket here. Okay. Because I do think, especially in the Old Town site, some of the low impact development is probably going to be needed. So having criteria, certainly with engineering and whatnot, understanding that and weighing in on that and having a criteria for that. I don't know if we have a criteria for low impact development now or not. Vance, I don't. It's probably on a case by case basis versus having an actual criteria.
It is.
So, okay, having a criteria. I think we're going to see more of that in the future, not less, as we run out of as we run out of developable land, and especially we get into redevelopment and we change impervious cover a little bit. Low impact or these types of things are going to certainly be needed. So that's the way I see it.
One thing that I would just suggest, considering while talking to engineering and whatnot, and Darren, maybe you can weigh in on this for me. If we're going to be asking private property owners to allow their property to be used for public use, is there some sort of indemnity that they would be allowed to have? 'Cause I can easily see, Kelsey-Seybold builds a hospital, puts in a dry detention that gets used for a soccer field. The kid gets hurt, and they sue Kelsey-Seybold because it's their property. So something along those lines to protect them. If we're going to ask them to allow that, how are they protected from that?
No, seriously. When it comes to,
gonna get more
yeah,
just
I don't,
left.
are we talking specifically about using private property
That was my question.
for public purposes?
And I think before we go down the
I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah,
And-
I would-
And
I
so
would
I
say-
just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and I would say it's more about allowing private detention areas to count as green space and encourage them to either to plant ponds, which we don't do now. I mean, detention ponds are essentially just great areas to plant if you can get the people who maintain them to agree, like, oh, I'll mow around it. And so in the same thing, if you had a large development that came in with a large pond and it was dry bottom, could they put soccer goals at the end of it, for example, that serve them?
And use it.
For their own purposes, not allowing the general public to just show up.
Or a credit, a dedication of parkland to the city
So
from
I'm
that property.
a big believer in the dual purpose. I mean, it should be, if it's used as an amenity, if it's used as a park, if it's used as recreation space, then they should get credit for that, some credit for that. Same thing if it's a wet bottom and there's walking tracks around it, if there's a fishing pier on it, if there's something that allows for, those types of things, and it's being maintained by an HOA or some entity other than the city, they should be getting some open space and parkland, type credit, for that. I'm a big believer in that. Because that'll actually encourage it. And that's what we want to see, because that subdivisions that have that versus just a pond sitting on the back that grows up with weeds will actually, drive value longer term than the other.
was
And
just
it can attract nuisance, and if you get people out there using this space, it's always good.
Ms. Kate?
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Also, it says, protect forested areas. How? That's for us to do? Or for developers to do? Who's protecting them?
So that the one in the workbook, it's mainly the things that we have heard aligned. Right now, we're working through certain recommendations specific to that.
So I have
So it,
So I have a question on that, and Martin was here when Baker's Landing was done. So Baker's Landing has a corner, southeast corner of their development that was ages ago was a pecan orchard, but it's overgrown with other probably other species and other trees now.
They are, but the
Yeah.
ponds are still there because
Yeah, it's all-
still pick them up.
Yeah, it's all still there. And they, part of their development, they left that forested. I don't know if they got green space for that. I don't know if they got open space for that. I don't know if they got credit for all that. That would be it's been a day or two since that was done. I can't remember. But I think that's what she's alluding to. If you can keep some of that, what credits do you get towards that? So that's a relevant, we know where that development is and we know what was kept. So that would be the kind of thing, Ms. Cade, that you're talking about. Right.
That's a good example, Mayor.
Mr. Fernandez, anything to add on those? Okay. Sounds good. We'll move on to next.
All right. Specifically, well, let's go on to signage recommendations. So again, on the feedback that we received, the aligned feedback, we're looking to compile signage guidelines into a centralized section and simplify the requirements that would improve clarity, remove redundancies, and make the code more user-friendly. We will use images in charts and diagrams in the section to explain the desired intent and location of signage, and also use a graphic table to define standards for each type of signage. And we receive comments about revising signage types based upon allowable dimensions, zoning compatibility, and approval procedures to streamline the permitting process. And comments about adopting a more adaptable signage framework to ensure consistency and in compliance across different property types while responding to site-specific conditions. While ensuring well-defined compliance requirements during tenant changes, ownership transfers, or specific timelines to ensure consistency enforcement and reduce confusion for property owners and staff. And possibly offer tailored regulations specific to certain zones like Old Town. And then mixed feedback that we heard was providing timelines and incentives, such as design incentives, grant opportunities for compliance. So when we say mixed feedback, some were for, some were against. A phased removal process helps modernize signage by transitioning outdated or non-compliant signs without placing sudden financial burden on businesses. So here, related specifically to signage, regarding murals and monument signs, should murals require a P&Z and City Council approval, 1, and then 2, monument signs, should monument sign requirements be standardized across the city?
Back to us.
Open it up for questions.
Okay. We'll throw it open to P&Z.
Trey?
Thank you. Can you give us some context on the second one, on the second question, to make sure we understand? I mean, was it a question of literally across the city we want all of our monumentation signs to be the same?
Yes, and this kind of goes to...
Sorry, if I may.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, no. Regardless of the approved overlay district that it may be a part of. Sorry, what's the second?
Yeah, I think further study would be required to understand where we would be overriding an existing overlay district. We probably don't want to do that. And kind of lends itself to the question we asked earlier about should there be tailored sign standards for districts like Old Town? And are there any other districts in the city in which we might consider that, perhaps along 288 where you have a different monument sign overlay, for instance?
Okay, because I could really see the stark contrast maybe once the dust got settled. I could see a stark contrast if the city had citywide guidelines for signage, and then we do get to the Old Town, and it's more of a modern versus more of a Old Town feel, and there's a stark contrast between the two. So I would just make sure that we are working through that diligently. And then my other question was on the packet or handout. Maybe I'm not understanding the damaged signs, or damaged signage should be replaced based on 60% of building area.
Yeah, that was a typo on our part. So that is 60% of the sign itself. And it could actually be spun into two possible recommendations here. if there's improvements to over 60%, remodeling a building over 60% of the footprint, replacing the sign would be required to bring it up to the UDC code.
Okay. And then I would echo, I think it was the mayor's point, if the sign does get replaced or the building does get damaged, conformity, we're not throwing the whole gambit at that to get the sign, I think it behooving the city to allow the business owner to replace it within the means such that it still maintains getting business back to the sign holder. And then my last comment was I've noticed as I drive around some of the, and I do see it on here, it's the regulations in terms of LEDs and how bright and the direction of the brightness. I do hope we work through some of those details, because you could be driving along and a sign that is glaring at you at night is almost as bad as headlights at the wrong level, coming into you.
Yes, and we've got, we do have a lighting designer at Design Workshop, and so we're going to be getting with him specifically on these code updates for those kind of issues in particular.
And I would recommend putting some portion of that on an enforcement type piece, such that if we're driving around and it be enforceable even after the fact. Hey, your signs blind people. You need to bring those up to the current standards such that they don't. That's all I had. Thank you.
I just say for murals, I think staff should be able to handle that. I think there should be some guidelines, maybe whether included in the UDC or just separately adopted or put out by council, but some framework. Then maybe there's an appeal process. If council says no, then they could go to council. I mean, if staff says no, they go to council. I think there needs to be some pretty good regulations for monument signs, but I don't want to see the same thing across town. I think there needs to be, let's put a box together, but give some flexibility for the builder, developer, store owner to do something creative with that. Same thing with, say, Old Town. You want to create a district, you want to create a look and feel. You still need to leave some flexibility for individual use. So, thank you.
I agree with John on the murals. I think staff can definitely do that. Like you said, we could do some guidelines and then set some type of appeal process so it can go to y'all to look at. I agree also on the monument signs. I do have a question in the packet though, under mixed, where it says clarify whether violations are directed to property owners or tenants. What is our thought process on that?
So we had a discussion on this at the technical group this morning, and that had been a question that we'd heard during our conversations. And it sounds like there's movement towards holding the property owner, not the tenant, responsible.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, going to turn it back over to you, Mayor.
All right, real good. Real quick on these, like the recommendation of an appeal process that either goes to P&Z or council. I don't know about both. Maybe it's, especially if something gets turned down because of content, I can see that happening. And so other than that, I think staff could come up with a good guideline. On monument signs, I think we have different monument sign requirements now based on zoning districts. And that usually was, or area of town, like Freeway, they had monument signs that had a different height, different size because they're on the freeway versus, up and down Broadway or up and down Pearland Parkway. And all that was put together for those types of reasons. But I do like having, more flexibility built into our sign requirements, because again, that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. So I kind of like the flexibility of it, as we move that forward, and especially I think Old Town site. Maybe there's something that comes up that's massaged or looked at, that's special or different than the rest of the city. But again, I would create more flexibility, not less, as we move it forward. So we'll open it up to, and on to Trey's point, this goes back to your point that you raised a minute ago. Through no fault of somebody's, they should be allowed to put back, because let's take the sign that you're talking about. Somebody hits a pole sign, takes it out. Yeah, their insurance company's gonna pay to indemnify it, right? But they're not gonna pay the owner to bring it up to
Standards.
city
And it could be
standards.
more than the sign that.
So that ends up getting into a legal, now we just put them in legal battle and all that,
Put them into a cost that may be considerably more than what,
even what their policies were.
right, or what the insurance company's willing to pay,
Right.
or what the sign is worth as
Right.
is.
Right.
And so that was one thing I was going to bring back.
And that's direction to staff on how to do that. Up until now, it's the UDC, it's damaged, it's down, you gotta bring it up to standard. And so I think we need to have that flexibility. Same thing when we have storms. We have a hurricane, we're in Hurricane Alley, so have a hurricane, sign gets damaged more than 60%. Is that, I mean, it's an act of God, so should we have a process to where?
And there's an example of that at Old Alvin and 518.
Yeah.
We had the Hurricane Burl take down the sign, and now the landowner is complaining about, or the renter or tenant, I guess you'd say, is complaining about the cost of the sign to replace it instead of just rebuilding what was there. So,
I think there should be a process to be,
yes.
open it up. You got any more?
Well, I've got, Member Chavarria sent me an email here with, I don't know, 8 or 10 questions here that I'll roll through, kind of hitting about some stuff like that. She's hitting on the phasing out of older signs. I can tell you, in the older part of Pearland, if you want to come in and require signs to be redone, we will get severe pushback. Because first thing that'll come out of their mouth is, I've been here for this many years and now you're telling me I need to change it because you want to. Get your checkbook out and we'll do whatever you want to do. So when it comes to stuff like that, you got to be real sensitive to, if we're going to go down that path, then whether it's the EDC or city wants to pay for it, I guarantee you older businesses will say, sign me up, we'll do what you want to do. But Member Chavarria's first question was, when should older and non-conforming signs be required to be upgraded upon ownership change, business remodel, after a set time frame, was her first question here. But like I said, if you get into a non-conforming sign that's been there for years, and when I say years, it could be 50 plus years. That's her question there is, what triggers would it be for that?
Great question. We talked about that a little bit this morning with the technical group, and it could be when there's a property owner change. But again, this discussion will help us determine where we go with that recommendation. So if we're hearing other things other than a property owner change, or maybe it's a remodel, there's a lot of different options, but I'm hearing that we need to be really sensitive and careful about when we're making this request.
In the older parts, like I said, with,
Right.
with places that have been here for a while. Next question
Well,
she had.
before you move on from that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's kind of discuss that question, because it's a good question. And we did talk about it, looking back in my notes, back in the August UDC updates meeting that we had. And I felt like the consensus back then, in my opinion, on when signs should have to be updated would be if it's a substantial remodel. Somebody comes in and buys a piece of property, it's already got a sign, they expect to just make a banner that fits in that sign. I bought a new piece of property, and part of my expense of buying that property is tear this sign down for no reason other than just, now it's my property. So I wouldn't be in favor of it being just because the property changed hands type situation needs to be updated. I think it needs to be more tied to the actual development of the property. If they want to come in, just like we were just talking about earlier, if it's a 60% maybe we land on a number if you're gonna do 60% or 70% or whatever number it is to upgrade or remodel that property, then that would trigger having to do something with the signage as well. And I would echo what's been said in reference to signage myself. One of the things, and I think I mentioned this back in August also, one of the things that makes Pearland the biggest small town in Texas is the character of Pearland. It doesn't look like just the same thing everywhere all the time. And I think we want to maintain that as much as we can. So allowing that flexibility, allowing people to be a little more creative and not coming in and saying you just got to update because we changed things. But as far as to Member Chavaria's question and to give you guys some direction, that would be my recommendation would be tie it to a remodel. Member Chavaria's question.
Spokesperson.
Tie signage updates to remodels and or that if you've got 60% or more destruction to the sign, then it's time to bring it up.
Clarifying question, if, is it a new property owner and a remodel?
No, I would think that
Just a remodel.
If you're doing, and I'll say I think 60% is a fair number. If you're going to go and upgrade that property and do 60% or more worth of remodel work to that property, if you're doing that much work to it, you're required to update your electrical to current code, your plumbing, your HVAC, your parking, your sign should be no different. That just needs to be part of it. FEMA could come into play depending on the floodplain. So I would say ownership is irrelevant. It's what are you doing to the property?
And yeah, and under that, I mean, obviously, we would hope somebody's doing a pre-development meeting, so the signage and everything else is caught when they're considering and doing that remodel. I think you've got some other questions.
Yes, sir. Will business owners have flexibility in signage designed to reflect the aesthetics of their building?
Yes, there will be flexibility. So today we're talking about how much flexibility, and I'm hearing that we want to have the flexibility for creativity. And so I would say the answer to that question is yes. We haven't yet defined that that's the work that's to come next.
Okay. All right, then should upgrades be required only during major remodels, ownership changes, or within defined compliance window? I think we kind of just spoke about that one, so we'll move on from that one. And here's one we kind of hit on. When should older or non-conforming signs be required to upgrade set time frame? Here again, I can tell you the folks that I know that I grew up with, if you start telling them they're going to need to change signs, you're going to get severe pushback. Just because the city does not like the age of their sign. So next one is, how do we determine, replace, or repair non-conforming signs?
And on that, actually, I was going to ask a similar question about a comment I may have heard Member Byram ask. So is there consensus that if a sign is damaged beyond 60%, it needs to come up to conformance? Were you agreeing with that, Member Byram?
I was agreeing with that, yes.
So if a car hits a sign and it's damaged at 60% or greater.
Okay, so the one that we were talking about earlier, it's in a very small lot, very tight space.
As long as it's reasonable to actually do, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When it becomes something like that, to me, a straight replace of what was there makes more sense than trying to, I want to say, fit a square peg in a round hole, because you can get into that in these older pieces of property.
And it may be a little bit too weedy of a conversation for right now, but I am curious, why would the property owner be paying to replace the sign? Why wouldn't the vehicle owner's insurance?
Because an insurance company is going to say that sign's worth $5,000, and the UDC's saying, here's what needs to be done, and it's 10.
Right. So
And
it's not worth 5, it's worth 10.
Yeah, but what they're looking at is, this is what the replacement of that sign is. They're not looking at what an upgrade is.
I think that gets a little, like I said, it gets a little weedy. I mean, we do have to have the flexibility. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. We do have to have the flexibility, and I think that's the overarching theme to all of this is flexibility. That you have to have flexibility to adjust the situation given on the unique circumstance. I mean, if a sign is in a scenario that it gets hit by a car and it gets torn down and it's 80% damaged, but there's not enough property to build a conforming sign because of the restrictions of the land, then we can't just tell them you don't get to have a sign.
And I agree about the level of weeds we found. It may be a variant situation, but remember, we're writing rules for the 80 and 90%. And
Correct.
so if there's consensus that if your sign's damaged, add a percentage, and I'm 60%, 80%, y'all get to set, these bodies get to set that. I want to make sure Design Workshop has direction of, no, as a rule, generically, if your sign's damaged at 60% for any reason, it comes into compliance.
I would push that up higher.
I'm not married to it. If you've got something
Yeah,
that makes more sense, go.
Again, that's where I want to be careful through no fault of a property owner's occurrence. We've had tornado, we've had hurricane, we've had somebody hitting their sign through no fault of their own. Next thing you know, there's added expense that's thrown on that owner that yesterday he didn't have, today now he's got it. And that's the scenario I'm talking about, that I mentioned in the last round of this, and that is, somebody has that now. Insurance company says, no, we indemnify what's there, and we put a potential car owner who, yes, it's their fault, or maybe they got forced off the road, somebody else left, I don't know, but next thing you know, we're creating a legal fight, and so I said this 20 years ago when we passed the UDC, but it was probably 15 years ago that we discussed it, and that is, how do we put common sense into this thing? We've got to have some common sense measures that, we're putting these people in the middle of this. What's the common sense thing to do? I don't know. You don't write code for common sense. I get that, but we've got to have something, whether it's an appeal process, and it shouldn't be a month or two to get that done. We've got to have something that says this makes sense. And I don't know, and Vance, you'll probably agree to this, that staff doesn't necessarily want to be put into that crucible. That's not where I'm headed either, but short of having to go to ZBA, or short of, there's got to be an appeal process where that makes sense. At the same time, yeah, there's some signs that they do need to be, they need a fresh coat of paint,
And that has more to do with maintenance than it does.
It does, and I don't know that we'll solve it tonight, but I think you're getting a flavor of what we're talking about. So Trey, is it on this particular topic?
Yes, sir. Really quick, and thank you for indulging me. For some reason, I'm picturing we're talking about single business, but I'm seeing the multi-strip.
It could be a multi-tenant.
Multi-tenant, and where I see maybe a facet that hasn't been discussed, and I could be wrong, was if a new tenant comes in, a lot of times, sure, they'll update the sign above their door, but not the signage out front. And I don't know if it was discussed or thought about, okay, if one tenant out of 5, comes in and replaces their sign, that's 20%. But at what point do we require new signage out front, or some thought? And again, to your point, Mayor, it doesn't need to be figured out tonight. It can't be. And lots of weeds here. Just thinking about that, right? You have a multi-tenant strip center. Somebody new comes in and replaces a sign, but doesn't replace the sign at the street because the owner doesn't feel like he needs to, because, there's the big sign above the front door. Should that be required? I think so, for just general guidance and whatnot. Or at what point does, this is your 5th new tenant in 2 years. I'm throwing out numbers just for the sake of conversation. Your next one will require that sign to be updated as it's 20 years old, or something to that nature, right? To where we're getting something fresh, we're getting new companies and new vendors in the strip mall. Why can't we refresh the signage and bring it up as close as possible to current standards at that point? Just something to think about. Rhetorical. Thank you.
Thank you for flagging that. We hadn't yet talked about that relationship, but we'll make note of that and think that through.
I think you still have Mr. Maria's.
Yeah, there's 3 more.
Does Vance have any clarity at all?
Yeah, no, thank you, Member Byram. And Mayor, to your point, you know, we can chew on some discretion for the Director of Community Development. I mean, some gray in there that I might could chew on or agree to. But no, it sounds like there is consensus on there being a percentage. We can come back with a proposal on that. And then, you know, variances do exist for a reason. So go right ahead.
So her next question is, if Pearland requires unified signage, how should costs be shared? Should business owners cover full expense? Should the city explore funding support to reduce financial impact? Should the city or PEDC offer funding mechanisms, grants, fee reductions, phase compliance timelines to help offset expenses?
And we're not proposing unified signage.
Yeah, and I don't think we're recommending that, but my point to that would be if we get to a point and we've kind of got a wholesale area, we've done this with facade grants, we've done this with others,
Correct.
like we'll go to businesses and say that would be done through EDC, and that's here we're gonna do some sign grants and get some signs upgraded. I think that would be a standalone project or whatever through EDC.
You got 2 more. I'd like to see better support navigation to community amenities, corridors, and districts. I guess basically within the city, directing, where this park, where that.
Wayfinding,
Yeah, if that's what. Yeah.
better wayfinding.
Her last one is, what criteria should be used to evaluate new sign technologies, e.g. LED interactive projective signs? What are the current standards for LED signs, and do these need to be updated or expanded?
And then what's in the UDC to take on new technology that's not contemplated today?
So, that concludes her.
Questions? And we've made note of those. I don't have answers for all of those tonight, but we have talked a lot about LEDs and making sure that's reflecting the latest technology. Now, as how to future-proof it, Mayor, we'll think more through that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on the dais?
Nothing further.
All good? Okay. All right, next up.
All right, now we'll move on
Good
to
discussion, by the way, on that.
Yes. We'll move on to land use recommendations. So based on the aligned feedback that we received, we're proposing to simplify the land use matrix under larger categories by zoning districts and modernize use categories to reflect emerging market trends. Finer distinctions can be added where necessary to address compatibility or intensity concerns. Next, we're proposing to consolidate zone districts where requirements overlap or are redundant and better align with definitions with the land use code categories established in the Pearland 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The following reflects aligned feedback, however, certain questions remain to provide direction for the 50% draft update coming in December. So the first is to create compatibility standards and revise standards present in overlay districts to address setback requirements or buffers. This may include strategies such as building height step-downs or enhanced landscaping. Additionally, reducing the reliance on conditional use permits or CUPs by allowing more uses by right, paired with well-defined design standards that can help resolve compatibility concerns more efficiently during the approval process. Next, streamline the review and approval process to improve the predictability of the application process and reduce the time commitments required of staff, Planning and Zoning Commission, and City Council. Simple requests and small modifications should be permitted by right to reduce unnecessary hearings or delays. So we'll go to our Q&A and just open it up for discussion.
I knew she was going to be. All right. Oh, sorry about that. Start out with planning and zoning.
Trey? What do you think? Tommy?
On the residential zones, on the properties that are previous habitated and property is purchased by another buyer and they get a permit, tear the house down, Now they want to rebuild. Present UDC, the drainage code comes to where we are now on the present UDC. There are neighborhoods that houses are being demolished, new homes are being put back up, having to deal with new drainage codes, which is affecting neighbors on either side and behind the present properties because the drainage is being changed to the new code rather than the code that was being used when the houses were originally built. So somewheres in the residential, I would like to see drainage codes bringing the concept of the drainage district in which they're inhabited now could maintain the same, not drain everything from rear property to the streets when the streets drain to the rear of the property anyway. That doesn't make a lot of sense, and also it causes drainage problems where French drains is having to be put in at the rear of the property because what's happening is if not, you're draining on your neighboring property. So has that been discussed?
No, sir, not to that level of detail. But we are starting to understand the implications of what this means for infill housing in particular, infill land uses. So good comments.
And then also just to say it, that may be an update that would dovetail into the EDCM, the Engineering Design Criteria Manual over the UDC.
Thank you, Vance.
I would think just the way our old town, to look at the first question, has developed over the years, you probably need at least two because there is some heavy residential concentration, and I think you probably want to protect that. And so I would say you probably need an old town that's more commercial, retail, office space, but allows some residential and then something to protect the residential. With regard to CUPs, first off, I love the phrase minimize the overuse of CUPs, which means we're going to overuse them no matter what, but let's do it a little less than we're doing now. And I would say, yes, we need to minimize the overuse of CUPs. I think, one, we know there are some uses in the code currently that both council and the commission staff could look at and be like, why? Why do we need a CUP for that? And I think there are many CUPs in there that go through the process and they get the same 7 or 8 conditions every time, and then they pass. And so why are we forcing people to pay the money and wait a month or two to go through the process when staff tells them, look, this is what's going to come up. These are the 7 or 8 things you need to know before you get your car washed, before you get your gas station, before you do your whatever. And I think we just incorporate those. Let's look at what the history has been of the CUPs the last 4 or 5 years. And if it's been passed, 80% of the time with the same conditions, put those conditions in the code, make it a requirement. Let's just move forward. Thank you.
Okay, turn it over to you, Mayor.
Yeah, I'll lead off. I think in the Old Town, because of the zoning that's there now, I agree with what John has to say. There's a couple of areas of Old Town site that are, I wouldn't even say primary. It's probably 98% residential, and I think the only thing that maybe you look at there is, do you have live work? Does somebody have an in-home office, and what does that look like? Those types of things. But I think the districts the way they are, or is there a way to incorporate, especially on east of the tracks versus west of the tracks? West of the tracks is primarily residential. East of the tracks, I think you could combine the two and have two different, there to maybe look at. On what uses within a residential zone should require CUP, well, I think at the end of the day, we need to review CUP. We need to review, what happens in a CUP. I'll give you an example. Auto-related automatically goes to CUP. Well, if you've got a strip center and you're putting in an auto parts store, is CUP really necessary to go in and do that? the underlying zoning, whether it's GB or whatever, would dictate outside storage and all those kind of things. So I think we need to probably delve into CUPs a little bit more. I think the work that we've done 4, 5, 6 years ago was a great start. To John's point, we probably have some conditions on some of these things that should become criteria, or I'm not sure how to term it, but where that's going to be required if you're putting in X. So I like to see that. We're going to see more and more CUPs as we get built out, because people are going to bring in certain types of businesses. And really, the question, for us, is do we want to see more CUPs in our future? I think tonight we have, is it 3 of them? 3 of our public hearings are CUPs. So we're getting everything that you got about a month ago. So it's coming tonight. So my 2 cents. We'll open up to council.
Yeah, and kind of tag along some of those, in the Old Town District, I'm aware of 2 homes that were built that probably added a month to the construction of it, as well as expenses. To me, I think that's kind of ridiculous that somebody has to do that when that's what, is already there to begin with. So I'm in agreement on that. One thing that to me I find kind of interesting is a remodel, and in residentially zoned areas where you have this wall and it sits there for 6 months. I don't know, could be longer, could be shorter, and we're gonna build the home around this one standing wall, and then the next thing you know, the home's built, and then that wall comes down and it's a total new. I'm like, what in the world are we doing here? This is not a remodel, it's a rebuild. But technically, along the lines of how it's done, this is a remodel because that's what the original home was, and that percentage, or whatever the requirements are. And one was on Dixie Farm, and I got multiple inquiries about what was going on.
4 years later, they're finished.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another one in the neighborhood. Yeah. But, with that being said, if we're going to remodel, then okay, remodel and have those criteria. But, to sit there and leave a wall up for any length of time, and then it comes down as the final structure's being built, to me is kind of odd. But that's another thing that I think's a little quirky.
Any other questions, comments? We're on land uses. No, you're fine. You're all good. Turn it back over to, Ms. Kate, sorry.
As far as streamlining the approval process for some of these, I'm not for that. Car washes, things like that, they need to stay like they are.
Next up.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last comment.
He wants to leave car washes like they are.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, moving on to housing recommendations. So the recommendations that we crafted based on the aligned feedback, 1 were to define and add graphics for all housing types. 2, allow for smaller lot sizes and reduce associated standards, such as building setbacks and off-street parking minimums, to enable a broader range of housing choices. These changes can particularly benefit smaller households, seniors, single professionals, and first-time home buyers by lowering development costs and encouraging compact, walkable neighborhoods. 3, establish density thresholds that align with existing infrastructure capacity, such as roadway networks, utilities, and school enrollment zones, while also considering future growth projections and housing needs. Next, clearly define ADUs as one fixed habitable structure with full facilities per lot. ADUs would be subject to approval through CUPs, permitted only under an ownership model and prohibited as short-term rentals. Next is to maintain a plan development process, or PD process, for all multifamily projects. Next is to add design and open space standards by housing type. Next, prohibit short-term rentals in certain zoning districts, i.e. single family, or allow only under specific conditions with clear distinctions from hotels and lodging. Next is middle housing typologies as build to rent should be allowed only under an institutional ownership model, ensuring consistent management, long-term maintenance, and quality control while preventing the fragmentation and enforcement challenges associated with individually owned rental units. Next slide. This recommendation on this slide represents a new policy concept focused on developing incentive-based development standards. The updated code would benefit from integrating voluntary incentives to raise development standards. And incentives are not intended to excuse code misconduct. Instead, they are intended to encourage voluntary compliance while offering versatility that exceeds baseline code standards. This approach encourages innovation and allows the city to promote premium design without incurring an exorbitant number of resources to enforce design standards or compromise the code. In order to provide a broader mix of housing types and market-led development, the city of Mont Belvieu, for example, explored a tool, Housing Diversity Index, structured around a points-based incentive system. The index awards points to residential projects that include features such as a mix of units, like townhomes, duplexes, and ADUs, enhanced architectural standards or material quality, on-site amenities like green space, trails, or community gathering areas, and energy-efficient design or universal accessibility features. Projects earning higher scores may be eligible for regulatory incentives, such as increased density or reduced setback. Next slide. This recommendation on this slide represents another new policy concept focused on developing incentive-based development standards. The current plan development process in Pearland is perceived as lengthy, complex, and costly, which discourages creative or mixed-use developments, particularly for smaller scale projects. To address this, the updated code could include tiered PD processes based on the complexity of the application. For example, a PD light process would apply to projects with simple uses, consistent site plans, and community alignment. And a PD heavy process would apply to complex or non-contiguous projects, which would follow the PD regulations in the current code. This system could reduce the burden on council, streamline application and review processes, and provide a more accessible path to quality development. So the next slide will open it up for discussion.
Jennifer, we'll turn it over to you guys first.
Troy, do you have anything? Tommy?
On the restricted, unrestricted ADUs, I received an email this afternoon of a question that was brought by one of our citizens that asks if he builds the ADU for a parent, grandparent, or any other family member, and they pass, and he has no other family member put in there, and he can't rent it, what is he expected to do? Let the building deteriorate, cause him to sell a family home? Some good questions. And I guess to really have some clarification, if we're going to put this in the Unified Development Code, well, if our city continues to grow and we get over the 150,000 member threshold, where is that going to put us with this ADU inability to rent or use for profit? And I guess, Mayor, that's more of a question for you to really give us some insight of what we need to do on the new UDC, because if we put something in the UDC that is contrary to this new Senate bill, and we begin to be regulated by that.
Yeah, real quick. So let's talk about that. Vance, what exactly came out of the legislative session on ADUs? I know there were multiple. What ended up happening?
So I would want to refresh before I said exactly what happened. However, brackets were added to 150, meaning we were able to dodge it. However, I want to say it was pretty pretty big swing and change as far as the number of ADUs. I want to say it was people can have more than one, and they're allowed by right. And I know some of you may be more familiar with than I am, but we were bracketed out of it, but it was allowed by right, and I believe it was they could have multiple.
Well, they went with the 150,000 in population and up, just like they did on the small lots and they did on the multifamily, anywhere. So at least they were consistent on the 150. The downside for that is we're going to be at 150 sooner than we know, and we're going to hit all those at one time.
We got to get the bracket changed.
So either we get the bracket changed or we have to come to terms with how this is going to affect us and have our own response for it when it happens. So I think for us to put all of our eggs in the legislative basket to get the brackets changed would be futile. So I think we need to come up with something that kind of threads the needle here of what can be accepted, what do we want to see, how do we want to go about the whole by right and I know Councilmember Koza is going to say it, you're going to turn every single family neighborhood into a multifamily development, and so where do we do this to make sense? I think the person's right. If they do this for an aging parent and there it is, now what do they do with it? We've just got to be careful where that slippery slope goes. So I'd like for us to figure out what we're gonna go and do, and even if that's pushing it to the limit a little bit as far as the law is concerned, I think we need to be right there, but what our community wants, and thread that needle. Like the one we've got tonight, it's on a large lot, or and those types of things. That's one thing. If we're talking about a 50-foot lot, a 45-foot lot, and we're trying to put an ADU, that's a whole different animal, in how we're doing it. So I think we need to not know more. I think we have time. The good news is we're not at 150 today. I don't think we'll be at 150 at 2030. So that gives us some flexibility. And if they'll just let me sign it, we'll just be at 148.5, forever. But they won't. So, but I think we have some time to come up with some common sense approach to it. Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, if I could just offer a comment there. We know that some communities in North Texas have started looking into this, as well as the multifamily and commercial, the residential and commercial that's in that same bracket. And so we're looking closely at those communities have started.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some best practices of cities coming out of this that we're going to be looking at. I don't know that we solve the ADU question even with our UDC rewrite. I think we're going to have something survive this and move, because I think there's going to be, like you said, there's going to be like size, like kind, like type communities across the state that are grappling with this, and you're going to see some coalescing around criteria, if you will, for them. But I want to let the P&Z continue on. I know we got to Tommy, and I don't know that that Tommy finished his comments.
Just to go through the list real quick, I'm all for incentives. If it gives us a better product, I'd rather have 4,000 lots, better developed, better designed, than another D.R. Horton subdivision. It's something that actually adds value more than just the land itself, but to the community as a whole. I don't think I'd support a tiered plan development, because that first tier is going to blow up at some point to a tier 2 anyways, and you might as well just do it all. I would say that I think we forget sometimes that a plan development is something that's supposed to be special and give something to the city. We're giving you, the developer, allowances. What are you giving us? And it should be better than just a 4-story building. That tax base is great. We appreciate it. But just like I said at our last PD on the apartment, enough of the blah. Let's get some high quality, let's get some actual thought and consideration to what you're doing and how it relates to our neighborhoods. You know, I don't know about the R zone support narrow lot and missing middle. I think definitely we need to find a way to make that work. There's a need there, and the smaller lots, a little bit smaller home product is going to be it. I am cautious still about the build to rent, and I think that needs to be regulated and looked at. I would not just open up to that. I would still maintain multifamily housing as PDs. I think opening it up. I mean, we can design a box. We can come up with something really nice and put it in the rules. But I think in the end, just letting them come to us and working with them through that process, I think works well for the city. And I don't think the costs are exorbitant. When you think about the number of dollars they're going to invest in this property, 5, 10, 15,000 that they're going to spend on this process is not, not going to be a big deal for them. Thank you.
Pretty much agree with everything you said. On the tiered plan development, I do like what you put in here. I think that we're really going to have to define what light means. I agree that I think pretty quickly it's going to go into tier 2. So I think we're really going to have to define exactly what that means. And then on the handout under mixed, you have build to rent, not optimal, but possible under institutional ownership and strong standards. Tell me what you mean by institutional ownership.
So a single owner with an on-site management company.
Bingo.
What do you mean? Yeah, so the comments were mixed. Maybe build to rent, but if so, we should consider, a management system that keeps the quality there. And so our recommendation is, if to move forward with BTR, that would be mandated that it has an institutional owner or a single owner with an on-site management.
Then I would just add that, you ought to just run it like a PD and it's an apartment complex, just homes versus multifamily. It's a separate kind of multifamily. If we're going to allow BTRs, then let them be through that process so we can see the site plan, we can see the development plan, we can make sure it meets what we want.
Yeah, and I think that's been my stance from day one, is not lot and block, but single reserve. That keeps it in an institutional or somebody with lots of money to own it and operate it. Amenities, on-site management, I think, are key. To John's point, it would end up being a PD, which is fine. But again, I think it needs to be on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we have it's allowed here, it's allowed there, it's allowed here. I think it's a case-by-case, type of process that we go through. So
we currently have one at Cullen and Fight. That's a build to rent. Right. And then we have one that's scheduled in Massey Oaks. So those are the two that I know of.
So
one that's on the ground and one that's proposed.
We have one other. It's by one of the lakes. Can't remember the name of it. It was a townhome product. It's at the other end of the one, same that's on Fight and Cullen. You go to the other end of Fight. There's one there. It's done. To my knowledge, it's not lot and block, but I take that back. I think it was zoned townhome, so they have townhomes. So by right, it's lot and block. And so the one on Cullen and Fight is lot and block. The one in Massey is single reserve.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. I know those two. I know
those are single reserve, and so and just for the record, that anybody goes back and picks these comments up and want to know why. Pretty simple. Let's say you have a lot and block, and it turns into a build to rent community. The exit strategy, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road is we're just going to sell them off one at a time. Next thing you know, somebody buys it to live in, and they should know this is a rental community. But if they don't know, next thing you know, they bought and they have ownership in a rental community. So we can control that by, we want them to be, single reserve. There is a place in the sphere of housing for build to rent communities. We just have, what do we want and how do we want them to be and look and feel and all of those kind of things makes sense. So while I'll do this, and I'll turn it over to the rest of council. Yeah, I think incentivizing developers to do certain things with amenities, open space, those types of things, the more we can do that, the better I think the product will be in the long run. I'm kind of like John. I'm not quite sure the tiered system. I'd have to know more about what that looks like before I could say, yeah, I like that. Seemed to me, tier 1 PD light would be something that just fits the zoning category by itself. And I think that's going to be hard given, R2 at a 70-foot lot. Yeah, if they want to come in and do it and tweak it, maybe that's what you're talking about. But if they're really trying to get into, narrower lots. I don't necessarily support consolidating Pearland's residential zones to support narrow lot by itself. I would support more along the lines of going back into our history of, I just lost my where people have a certain amount of density, they can go and no more, no less on a certain dense product. Because again, if it's coming in here, if they are going to go more dense and they are going to go and do something different, I want to make sure that the owners around them have the opportunity to see, feel, and hear what's coming in next to them. So I'm worried that if we did away with the residential zones, we've done exactly what Senate Bill 15 did. Is it does away with the residential zones, and I don't think that's our intent. I'd rather see that and where and how that's going to affect our communities. So I'll let you guys weigh in on that. So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few things. I'm not sure in reference to the ADUs topic. I know we kind of go round and round and round and round on this, and a lot of it ultimately comes down to enforceability. We can put all kinds of rules in place, but can we really enforce it? And so while I'm not a fan of them, I think there are times and places where they make sense. I don't think it's, I know the email you're referring to, I think it's a great question. I don't think it's the city's place to figure out what they're going to do with it next. I mean, I built an ADU here in town for a family several years ago, and I know that they have a long-term plan for it when there's not a member that's going to live in there, and that's part of what they've got to decide what to do. All that being said, I know the legislature is trying to force us into them eventually. I don't know if there's some things that we can do as far as setbacks or minimum lot requirements that say you can't have an ADU unless it's on a certain lot size. Yes, they're allowed in our community, but only in certain lot sizes. We're not going to stop them. We know that. But I wouldn't be in favor of putting a lot of things in the UDC that we're not going to be able to enforce anyway. If we're not going to also put the resources together within our code enforcement department or whatever to try to enforce it, there's no point in putting it in the UDC. From my perspective, don't throw a bunch of stuff in there that we can't follow anyway. As far as the build to rent, and then I'll get to the PD Light topic. I don't like build to rent either. We've had a lot of discussions around that. So all I'll say to that is if we're going to have them, if they're unavoidable, then I would agree that a single reserve type situation versus having all these individual, some are rented, some not, would be the best way to go. I'm assuming the PD Light concept came out of our conversation. So I'll try to bring some clarity to everybody to where that came from. Really my thought process behind that was oftentimes we get these planned development meetings that come in and 90% of what they want to do we're okay with. We just have certain little things that we want to get into. And it kind of goes back to like we talked about with the UDC, or not the UDC, CUPs earlier, that what I was thinking was if we could have something that doesn't require a massive amount of documentation for the applicant to go through a huge process of getting all of their plans done, all of their architecture done, all of their engineering everybody always asks for a TIA, which doesn't come till later. Like the only process we have right now is multiple meetings. And before we actually give them a yes, they've got to put massive amounts of documentation together. And for some projects, that's going to make sense. But for other projects, we're all looking at it going, yeah, we're going to be fine with this, but you have to go through this process. That's what I was looking for in saying, do we have a lighter process? Everybody's going to be okay with it. We can give them a yes at the first meeting because we're happy with it and we have a basic understanding of the site plan, and then give staff the authority to say, yeah, they're staying consistent with the general idea. And if they try to deviate from that, then staff can push them back to it. That was the general thought process between the light and the heavy, so to speak. Does that kind of help make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think that depends on the development, right? And
Right.
so to that point, I think here's an example of missing middle, smaller lots. You know, I think we end up creating a category. I think it's compact residential. I think we'll end up creating that category as here's the rules and regulations around it. So we're not starting with an R4 or even an R5 or an R4, you know, and working down and then having this massive amount of variances that are coming through a PD process. So, you know, we've got a project that's working its way through. Seemed like there was lots of agreement from P&Z and council as it marshals through here, and assuming it gets all the way through, and we do, you know, I think does that become our code? Does that become our criteria? I don't know that one does, but I think it puts us on the road of something that kind of becomes our compact residential. So then somebody's going into, you know, another area of town that's 15 acres and they want to do something similar. They're not having to have, there's the criteria that you start from, and so their variances aren't 20, maybe it's 5, you know, that we go to. So maybe, but I think the project light or the PD light really depends on the project itself, which is unfortunate.
No, it does. And I think figuring out what that criteria is makes sense, but it would ultimately be, in my mind, up to staff to say, hey, what you're asking for, we're going to put through the PD light process because you're hitting all the markers.
Yeah.
Versus this is going to have to be a full-blown process.
Yeah, but I think when they come in here and we make it abundantly clear, we want a quick and easy, it's going to be a cheap no, then it's incumbent upon us to really give good feedback, both P&Z and council, to say, you know, I don't like it at all, say it. You know, so we want to give them that feedback, because up until then, they've spent $1,000 plus whatever they spent on some drawings to come in. But if there's like, hey, we like the concept, we like the whatever, to John's point, they're going to start spending some money. It's incumbent upon us to kind of know and understand that. But I'm also not looking for them to design soup to nuts the whole thing either. So I think that makes sense. Chavaria, up next.
Thank you, Mayor. So not necessarily in favor of the build to rent. As far as the tiered plan development, I would like more information on what that looks like. I don't think it's anyone's surprise, but I'm not in favor of ADUs at all. So I think that if it's zoned for single use, it should maintain single use and not the integrity of that character of that neighborhood. Thank you.
Yep. Next up, Mr. Koza.
Thank you, Mayor.
I thought you were pointing.
No. I was just raising my hand. I'm sure everybody here at the dais is quite versed, in my opinion, on short-term rentals and ADUs. A quote kind of comes to mind for me: "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," and I put ADUs and STRs in that realm. We have currently 2 that one, I don't know, within the last several months, created a situation where, in this short-term rental, where we had estimates are between 500 and 1,000 kids at the facility in an evening. And when we have those type situations, it led to a building being shot, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. At another location, a kid being pistol whipped. And what you do with these is you invite those type things when we don't control them. I want to say probably within about a month after me being elected 3.5 years ago, in Manville's ETJ, there were 3 kids shot. And Pearland got the rap for it because it's closer to Pearland than it is for Manville. And when we get into these type, if you want to call it living accommodations, they warrant this. There's one that's right across the street here. The neighbors, how would you like to look out your front window and have a high school to college age kid urinating in your flower bed? This was going on, and these are the type things that it goes to the one across the street here. Every time the guy rented it, said, "Don't worry about it. You're my family member." And that's going to segue me into talking about ADUs, where I've asked legal multiple times, how do we regulate it? And short of asking for blood samples or whatever you want to do to get DNA, it's hard to do. I know if you go downtown, the state is real good about passing laws and then not giving you the money or not doing anything to enforce it. And there's a sign on one of the supports on 59 Elevated that says something to the effect, you can't live underneath the bridge, state law. Well, look at how many homeless people we have underneath the bridge. It's one of those deals that we're opening up a can of worms, whether it be us or whether it be the state, without the ability to regulate it and without the ability to control it. Whoever came up with affordable housing, I might only be able to afford a home that's worth $100,000, and you might be able to afford something that's $1 million. And affordability is all
Relative.
It's all relative.
Yep.
And so the term missing middle, affordable housing, in my opinion, I think it's BS. But at any rate, that's my 2 cents on it. One other thing, if we do get into ADUs, I know the mayor was talking about the state bill that said, multiple without any standards of what can be built. What will we be looking at? What size? What requirements? I know people that have 4 or 5 acres. Could they put 100 of them on their property? That's what it opens up to. Well, I understand that, but they won't fill those gaps. Right. So what will end up happening is we'll be stuck with this law or regulation. We'll be dealing with it. And I can tell you the one short-term rental that was over here, nobody wanted to touch short-term rentals because the AG filed the amicus brief on behalf of the landowners. Well, I can tell you anything I've read about short-term rentals, when you get one in your neighborhood, it depresses prices. And so where the other homeowners or property owners that their land value has gone down because a short-term rental is in their neighborhood. And I guess Ken Paxton could give a rat's about it. And those are the type of things that are highly, highly frustrating. And until you have something like that next to you, you really don't care. But get one next to you and you'll find religion quick.
I will add to the ADU conversation. I'm all for not allowing them in our UDC until we have to. I think what we need to do at this stage is figure out what we're gonna do when we're required to do it, right, versus we get a requirement, now we're scrambling.
That's been my stance on it.
And I would agree with you.
Which is why I think we take our time to figure out what we want.
Yes, yeah. And that's whatever regulations we come up with. And like I said earlier, changing the bracket, I'm all for trying to get that happen as well.
So just along those lines, so real quick, so Vance, I did get the answer from Joel. So the ADUs did not pass the legislative session. It was Senate Bill 673, came close, but got struck in calendars in the House. So it did not get out of the House. So currently, there's not an ADU threatening us. Obviously, that could happen.
Is it the density that passed? I couldn't remember if the density had passed.
That's the SB 15, which was the density one, and the size lots
Correct.
passed.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I thought the ADUs
That's the one
failed.
that's 150, and
Yes,
so
correct.
the ADUs came close, but it did not. Chances are it'll come back up in 27, the 90th legislature. So again, to the point, I think it's a matter of time, but I think until then, we figure out what we want or don't want. Yeah. Right. So, sorry, Ms. Kate.
Okay, a couple things. Something Councilmember Koza said, I really agree with the missing middle. I think that's a term some developer came in and said because he wanted to build something here. I don't think that's not real. I don't think that's a problem here. We have a wide variety of homes available, neighborhoods, and I don't, for number 3, I'm a hard no. I do not support that at all. Number 2, I need to hear more about that, I guess. We have very little developable land left, so, I mean, do I want to make it easier to develop it? And not really, but if I could hear more about it, maybe I would be for it. I'm not sure. For incentives, I'm not sure what active street means. For B, it says infrastructure upgrades and better site design. What does active street mean?
Just a street for more than just cars, so it has sidewalks and perhaps even room for bikes if needed, but yeah.
Thank you. So ADUs, we had one family come in that had a large lot that wanted the ADU for family, and I saw the value in it for them, and I voted yes on that one. For like our neighborhoods that are close, the houses are close together, I wouldn't be for it for that. But if they already have an ADU and they want another one, even a large lot, I wouldn't be for that. But I'm not as against ADUs as others are. But build to rent, no, I'm a hard no on that. So that's kind of where I stand on all that. But the tiered PDs, I would have to really hear more about it to get on board with that.
Anyone else? Yep.
Thank you, Mayor, and I apologize coming late. My apologies for that. Can you, and maybe I missed it, you had said incentivize. Are you talking about financial incentives for maybe a developer coming in and taking a lot and maybe building smaller homes like we have seeing right now on Knapp Road, I believe? I'm in favor of home ownership, and I would echo my council members here that I don't like built to rent, but I'm certainly in favor of smaller lots. But to help the developer make the numbers work, maybe we can give some kind of an incentive to say, hey, we'll provide the water lines or sewer lines, because I know the EDC has done that for businesses. And I know there are incentives in other communities to get smaller homes, because we keep talking about, we want our teachers and our first responders to be able to live here, and this is the route to go. So is that what you're proposing when you say incentive-wise? Or is that something you would consider in there, or is that something we could consider?
So the incentives that we're talking about, you can see on this slide here, it's not necessarily a financial payment to the developer. It's more a trade. So you provide higher quality landscaping, bigger trees, more frequent trees, better coverage on shrubs and ground cover, perhaps considering alley loaded access, public space improvements. So really delineating what is in these park spaces and the quality of it is being higher than standard. Building materials is a big one, especially since the state we can't regulate anymore on building materials. So this could ask for upgraded masonry on 3 or 4 sides, public art, and other kind of community benefit amenities in trade for lot size, smaller lot sizes, density, parking reductions, that kind of thing.
And I guess my point is, at some point, the pencil has to work out, right? The numbers had to work out. And so, again, if there's an opportunity, and I don't know if there's examples in other communities that have provided financial incentives to the developers, because, to ask, I mean, we're getting a lot by asking for upgrades to landscaping or artwork, because that's additional cost to the developer. And I hate to lose a developer who's willing to come in our community and say, look, I'm willing to do all this, but hey, there may be some need for help financially to make the numbers work. And I think it's something, I would tell you, I would be in favor of it, right? To say, look, if it's per lot, I believe in downtown Houston, at one point, didn't they offer some kind of tax credits to get apartments or residential development? Am I right?
Yeah, there's density bonuses, tax credits, where communities have affordability housing requirements. There's a lot of trade-offs there.
So is there something you can look at for our community to say, hey, there may be some kind of incentives? I know, again, I think to today's cost and then asking for these upgrades, I think you've got to be able to justify it to the developer, and we don't want to scare them off. Because I think what I saw on Knapp Road, what they're proposing, where there was a built to rent, and then Pelican came in and said, "Hey, we're going to build these homes," and great, it's a better product for our community. So,
Yeah, I'll weigh in real quick. I think what they're talking about incentivized would be, if you want smaller lots, then we want certain amenities to be placed into it. There is an incentivized financially, and that is we can allow PIDs. That allows them a reimbursable. It's not a MUD. Most of our MUDs are going to be phasing out, not necessarily creating a MUD, but you've got that. So as a developer, what typically happens is that you then sell your lots at cost. You're not selling them for a profit. If you don't have that financial incentive, then you've got to add whatever your percentage is in order to make some. They're not going to come if they're not going to make a profit, right? So I think we have to work through that, which again, I think we've got a development that's working its way through on McCard that seems like we're getting more of what we like to see. And it'd be interesting once we get that, we'll have, I think, a baseline to know how we can kind of hit a smaller lot and what that ultimately looks like. And so most communities, I think when you find, if there's communities out there that have incentivized by we'll pay for water and sewer, those are usually we did that in the old town site with Sullivan Brothers, but that was to hit a catalyst product and put in a product that we wanted to see to start sparking and doing some stuff in the old town site. Most communities, if you see them incentivized as like we will pay for water and sewer to bring it your way, is usually a very small community. They're looking for growth. They're looking to check the box and get it going. Obviously, we're not that. So I'd be real reluctant for us to be paying for water and sewer, in a 10-acre development, 15-acre development, that type of thing. Is there a cost share to bring water and sewer to something like that? We've done that in the past where it's an 8-inch line to bring it to them, but we really want it to be a 12-inch line, then we'll pay for the difference. We've done that before. I'm not against doing that, especially if that's what ultimately is needed. So I'd be real careful on that side of things. Not saying that there may be a scenario out there that might make sense for us to help a developer on the internal, but I think we can give them the incentive by creating a PID policy that makes sense. And I think we'll get a bite at that on the one that's on McCard as it's coming its way through. It'll be a great example for us to look at, and then how do we make that kind of our go-to and then go from there. I think other questions, comments? All right, can we wrap up hotels?
Sure can, yes, we're almost at the end. So the following recommendations are largely reflect the aligned feedback. So the first is to improve the quality, consistency, and long-term viability of hospitality developments in the city. We should establish clear hotel standards that set a baseline for development expectations based upon market standards. Next is to define hotel subcategories, which currently don't exist in the code. That would be boutique, economy, extended stay, business class, and luxury, and then establish tailored requirements for each to promote diversity. This ensures that while Pearland supports a variety of lodging options, all meet an appropriate level of quality and compatibility with their context. Next is to define the distinction between hotels, bed and breakfast, and short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, to establish separate regulatory pathways and performance standards for STRs, recognizing their unique operational models and potential neighborhood impacts. Next is to use CUPs to regulate hotel development and ensure compatibility with surrounding land uses by limiting their use in zoning districts that are generally incompatible with hotels or motels. And finally, hotels should follow emergency preparedness by installing backup generators as standard equipment. So next slide, we'll just open it up for discussion here.
Go to planning and zoning first.
Anyone? Right. You good, Tommy?
I remember we had the big discussion on hotels a while ago. I think yes, we do need standards, but I think we need to be careful not to overdo them. I think a lot of what we discussed before would have prohibited probably 75% or more of the hotels we have in our community now from ever being built. But I do think there is a certain level we would like to see, and I think we should strive for that. For the second one, it's interesting that we pull hotels out to have this discussion because there's so many developments that we have in this town that as they age, they start to look bad. And we're not talking about strip centers that were nice 30 years ago or 20 years ago or office building or whatever, but hotels have reached that level. And so I would think maybe a more holistic approach to development as a whole and how we want to maintain our structures and our buildings and just calling out hoteliers. I think it gets into the market and how we try to control the market. I mean, for a community that's very pro-development, pro-business friendly, we have these little niches that we say we're business friendly, except here we want you to do more. We expect more from you here. I think we just need to be careful about how we step into those and how we set up those rules. Thanks.
I don't have anything. Back to you.
All right, good deal. Open up for council for questions, comments on this. Mr. Patel?
I made it just in time, so I appreciate that. And so this is and Mayor, I do appreciate you. Several years ago, you gave me the time and listened to my concern. And the reason I brought this up, even when I was on council, when I first got on council, was, and John, you make a very good point, we should look at other developments as well. The reason, I guess, my passion project was on this was because we have a property down in Seabrook, and Seabrook has gone through a phase where their hotels that were a little bit older than what Pearland has have been deflagged, right? So there were Holiday Inn Express, and then now I believe it's like Captain's Inn or something like that. And my concern was, if you continue to allow to build smaller box hotels, which are 50 rooms or 60-room hotels, there are a couple of reasons. One, once their franchise is up, they can go change their name to Palace Inn. You're not going to do anything about it. That's one concern I have. If someone came here today and said, hey, I want to build a 60-room hotel, and if they said it was a Palace Inn, I guarantee you it wouldn't even make it to this podium, right? So that's a concern. And so why is that a concern? So a lot of our hotels in our market have gotten older, and they were, when they started out before this community got built, had to be built in a small box to prove the model works in this community. So as the model has been proven, you will see that we have several larger scale hotels. And now what's happening, Pearland is on this brink where I would say several years ago, we did a study for a full service hotel. EDC had funded it. And that study came back, and I believe it was like $67 million. Now, in order to build that, you have to prove the model. And the model is these smaller hotels that if we allowed to continuously build 70 rooms or 80 room model, they're going to eat away from the full service demand. And so no full service developer will come in and say, well, there's enough room here for me to survive, because a lot of these small hotels will get built in and they'll keep eating down the rate, and there will be a disparity. So that's one concern I have. Eventually, these hotels change hands, owners move on, and they basically continue to deflag, and they don't reinvest their funds in them. Case in point, Darren will share a hotel in our market that couldn't pay their taxes, and they struggle. They were not paying their taxes. They actually collected from their guests. They were not sending them back to the city. And so it is happening already where they're not investing back into their properties. And that's my point, to say, hey, we need to say what Grapevine, if you go down there by Grapevine Mills Mall, or technically just Mills, and by Dallas, they actually have an ordinance. They say, hey, we want you to build X number of rooms. We want to have X number of meeting space. You must have a full service bar. So it elevates your hotel developer to say, these are the standards. If I'm going to come to Pearland, this is what I must build. I'm not going to go in there with a smaller product that doesn't make sense. And I think for us, we have proven that model, that the small hotels work, and so do the large ones. We have the Hilton Garden Inn, we have the Courtyard. And if we want to elevate our development, and as we know, behind Bass Pro Shop, we have tons of land, and eventually somebody will build. We know several years ago, a developer was looking at it and they wanted to build retail. If we want the mixed use, then this will help kind of bring us to say, hey, we're not going to allow any more small hotels. Everything has to be something larger, something with high quality name. And so I think that was my point, to say, look, let's make sure that anybody who comes in here now says, you know what, Pearland's not going to let me just build even an 80-room hotel like a Best Western. It has to be something very high end. So that was my point, to kind of say, look, let's not even, and I know we have the right to say no, but I think council changes, and I think they might say, well, what's wrong with an 80-room hotel? Let's go do it. And so if they do it, my point is, you will never be able to get over the hump, and that's the main reason I want this to be more strategically put in place, so developers know exactly what to expect when they're applying or designing their building.
Good comments. Questions, comments? Mr. Cozen?
So one thing that I'd like to add along that, it's interesting that you say a hotel's not paying their taxes. For I guess non-hotel properties, and this kind of goes back to my short-term rental stuff. If you don't pay your state sales tax, the state will come down and close you in a heartbeat. I don't know why the tolerance for allowing hotels and or short-term rentals to not have to pay them, and who cares about it, just let them be the wild, wild west. But I asked our state comptroller, who now runs the A&M system, and he gave me a less than stellar answer when I asked about it. But at any rate, there's one thing that has popped up here in the last week that is really an interesting website. I think I shared it with everybody here, but it's called CIRTRU, CIRTRU.com. And whether you want to call a home a hotel or a boarding house or whatever you want to call, here's one that's on your side of town, 77584. Evidently, it's got 4 bedrooms. Bedroom 4 is occupied by a male roommate. Bedroom 3 is occupied by a male roommate. Bedroom 2 is occupied by a male roommate. Bedroom 1 says private, and they're preferred wanting a female rent this room for $1,500 a month with a $500 deposit. This is where this stuff just decays. And when I said earlier, the road to hell's paved with good intentions, this type stuff I just don't see as feasible. And I don't care if you call it middle marketing, affordable housing, whatever. This type stuff is, I called it a hotel. When I talked to the legal department, they called it a boarding house. But right now, this advertisement or this company says there's 24 rooms for rent available in Pearland right now. And that's across multiple homes. So, you know, when we get into short-term rentals, we get into something like, I don't even know what you call this. Our society is decaying. And this right here kind of shows it, because when you start moving into stuff like this, at least in a hotel, if somebody rents something, you have a credit card, you have an ID, then next, you know, criminal can move into short-term rental. And I don't know if anybody's ever tried to get anything out of Airbnb, but they'll tell you, good luck. Yeah. And that's even with law enforcement squeezing them. I just, here again, slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope for sure. Ms. Chavarria?
Thank you, Mayor. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of developing higher standards for hotels. I mean, I think it's time. I think we need to do that. So I'm in favor of both 1 and 2. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have to develop it overnight, but to your point, you and I mean, if we don't, we're gonna have some undesirable hotels, and we know what we're talking about here. We turn into an hourly hotel, and then you can imagine
Telephone Road for those.
you can imagine what this chamber will look like if we have a hotel that turns into an hourly hotel. So, but again, you don't have to look far. You just go just outside our city limits, and you'll see them just to the north of us. And so it's just a matter of time. Those were probably built that way to begin with. We don't want to be there. We don't want to go there. But I think it's having the right balance of amenities and room sizes or number of rooms and all those kind of things is probably warranted as we move in that direction. And on the sheet that you gave us, you know, certainly differentiating hotels from STRs, because I don't think you want to be in the category of an STR, you know, and having separate regulations. And I'm, you know, beginning to just believe we just outlaw the STRs altogether and let whoever sue us, but it's probably not the right thing to do. You know, just because you get one in a community and they become a problem. I think the event center scenario on Cullen is an exception. It's not the rule, but to your point,
you've got to have something to be able to deal with them.
But you got to have something to deal with them. So, open it up for questions, comments.
I just want to say that I agree with Member Patel on this. I think we need to have guidelines. I also like Commissioner John. He, you know, when he said, what are we going to do with the other structures, the other buildings, the other, you know. So I think we've made some really good points. But Member Patel, I agree with what you said. We got to put some guidelines, hold them, you know, to a certain standard, and make sure that they're doing their part. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions, comments? And to that point, maybe it's a code enforcement issue, I think, on some of the other. And so I'll say this, it's budget night. I'm not asking we add anything to the budget, but I am going to say maybe we discuss code enforcement and the additional personnel for code enforcement at the February workshop, because we're seeing more and more where we have a potential for a decay of a community. It's because of code enforcement, and so we've got our guys. They're working everything that they can. They're responding to complaints. They're not being able to be proactive, and so maybe that's something that we add to the February call, that we talk about what would be needed. The chief could probably get up and say we could add 20 tomorrow, but you know, what's realistic to get our code enforcement to where we're not only just responding to that, but we can actually be a little bit more, you know, proactive on what we've got going on. And I think we've got one last section left, and we've got to get ready for 6:30 meeting.
I'm happy to report we're actually done. So the next slide, if you want to skip over, I know this presentation is available in backup. We have some QR codes if anybody wants to scan and go to the actual outline or the memo. The outline is the short document, the memo is the longer one. And then the next slide is just about our schedule. We'll see you back here December 15th to talk about the 50% draft. So we're taking all of this feedback and starting to redline the actual language of the code.
Got it. Good stuff. As always, Design Workshop, thank you for all the valuable insight and work that you guys have been doing and the process that we're getting there. Bite sizes along the way, so greatly appreciate everything that you're doing. Vance, last call, anything follow up? All right, with that, we will adjourn this joint workshop at 6:05.